My name is Lauren Whitmore, and I make a living uncovering things that are out of place. I am a forensic accountant. Numbers lie quietly, but never convincingly, not if you know how to listen. For most of my adult life, I trusted patterns more than people. Ironically, the greatest deception I would ever face was not hidden in spreadsheets or bank transfers. It was lying in a hospital bed beside me, wrapped in white casts and calling itself my husband. Caleb Whitmore had been admitted 3 nights earlier after a serious car accident. Both of his legs were encased in thick plaster, suspended by metal pulleys that creaked softly whenever he shifted. The hospital room smelled of disinfectant and old fabric, a scent that clung to your clothes long after you left. Machines beeped steadily, like metronomes marking time I could not afford to lose. It was close to 3 in the morning, that strange hour when hospitals feel less like places of healing and more like warehouses for fear. I sat curled in a folding chair beside Caleb's bed, afraid to move, afraid even to breathe too loudly. He slept, or at least appeared to. His face looked pale, fragile. Sweat gathered along his hairline. I leaned forward and adjusted the blanket, whispering his name softly. I told myself this was what marriage meant, carrying weight when the other person couldn't. Endurance, loyalty, staying. The door opened quietly. Rachel Moore, the head nurse on duty, stepped inside. She was calm, efficient, and spoke only when necessary. She checked Caleb's IV, glanced at the monitors, then turned toward me. In a low voice, she asked if I could step out and call another nurse from the station. As I stood in past her, something cold slipped into my palm. I froze for half a second. Rachel didn't look at me. She didn't explain. She simply raised one finger to her lips, a clear instruction to stay silent. My heart pounded as I walked into the hallway. Under the dim light near the supply room, I unfolded the small piece of paper she had given me. It contained one sentence written quickly and unevenly. Check last night's security camera. He is not asleep. In that moment, something fundamental shifted. The ground beneath my certainty cracked open, silently but completely. Before that night, I believed my life was built on stability. I was 32 years old, careful, disciplined, predictable. I trusted logic, I trusted evidence, and at home I believed I trusted my marriage. Caleb and I had been together for 8 years. He was quietly charming, the kind of man who never raised his voice and knew how to appear dependable. He worked in construction management, often complaining about unstable contracts and long hours. I handled the finances. He handled everything else. The balance felt safe. Then came the accident. The call from the hospital shattered everything. Caleb was lucky to be alive, the doctor said. His legs were badly injured. The word wheelchair hung in the air like a threat no one wanted to name. From that moment on, I stopped being Lauren the professional and became Lauren the wife. I took leave from work. I slept in a chair beside his bed. My days became measured by medication schedules and visiting hours. I told myself love was proven through sacrifice. During those early days, someone else entered our lives more closely. Megan Cole, Caleb's younger cousin. She had recently moved to the city and offered help without hesitation. She ran errands, brought meals, handled paperwork. When I was too exhausted to think, she stepped in seamlessly. I remember feeling grateful, lucky even. Looking back now, that trust feels almost embarrassing. At the time, I saw nothing wrong. I saw family support during a crisis. I saw myself doing what a good wife was supposed to do. I did not see what was forming quietly right beside me. By the 3rd night, exhaustion began to dull my instincts. Still, something felt off. Caleb complained of pain constantly, but only when I was near. When nurses entered, his groans softened. When Megan sat beside him, his breathing became exaggerated, dramatic. Strangely, when I stepped out to make a call or grab coffee, the room felt calmer when I returned. Whenever I tried to adjust his casts or look too closely, Caleb stopped me. He gripped my wrist and told me he didn't want me to see him like that. He said it was humiliating. I believed him. Now I know it wasn't dignity. It was control. His phone changed too. Before the accident, he never locked it. Now it stayed hidden under his pillow, screen always facing down. Messages were silenced instantly. When I asked, he said it was work, then said he was ashamed of how useless he had become. Megan noticed everything, or at least pretended to. She reminded me to rest, told me I was doing enough. Sometimes I caught them exchanging quick glances, unreadable and brief. I dismissed it every time. Because when you love someone, you work very hard not to see what hurts. Rachel's note replayed in my mind over and over. He is not asleep. I tried to ignore it, told myself nurses were tired, that hospitals bred suspicion, that fear created patterns where none existed. But patterns are dangerous that way. Once you see the first one clearly, you cannot unsee the rest. I didn't confront Caleb. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't cry. Instead, I did what I had been trained to do my entire adult life. I looked for evidence. The next morning, I told Caleb and Megan I needed to stop by my office. I walked past the elevators, down into the parking garage, and locked myself inside my car. Only then did I let myself breathe. I called an old college friend who now worked in cybersecurity, someone I had trusted before on sensitive cases. When I explained the situation, he went quiet. Some things, he finally said. Once you see them, you can't unsee them. I told him I understood. Less than 2 hours later, he sent me a secure link. I put on my headphones, steadied my hands, and pressed play. The screen filled with black and white footage from the hospital ceiling. I watched myself, tired, small, adjusting Caleb's blanket before leaving the room. The door closed. The room went still. For one brief, desperate second, I hoped the nurse was wrong. Then Caleb's eyes snapped open. Not slowly, not groggily. Alert, sharp. And everything I believed began to fall apart. Caleb did not move like an injured man. On the screen, he pushed himself up on his elbows with ease, his movements smooth and controlled. There was no hesitation, no wince of pain. He scanned the room, then reached beneath his pillow and pulled out his phone. The confidence in his body made my chest tighten. This was not adrenaline. This was rehearsal. He adjusted the angle of his casted legs, rotating them slightly as if checking alignment for the camera. Then he smiled. A few minutes later, the door opened again. Megan stepped inside carrying a large shopping bag. She closed the door behind her and spoke casually like someone entering her own apartment. "Is she gone?" she asked. Caleb laughed. That sound, light, unrestrained, cut deeper than anything else. I had not heard him laugh like that in weeks. They ate food from the bag. Real food. Greasy, careless. Caleb drank from a bottle, tilting his head back easily. Megan sat close, touching his leg through the cast, reminding him to stay careful around staff, to keep the act convincing. Then the conversation shifted. They talked about my house, the brownstone my parents had left me, the one in my name, the one I had never thought to protect from the person I married. Caleb said once it was sold, everything would be clean. Gambling debts, loans from people who didn't like waiting. He joked about how predictable I was, how I always sacrificed first, questioned later. He said I would agree because I believed loyalty meant endurance. He said he would divorce me once the money was secure. When the video ended, I removed my headphones and sat very still in my car. The world outside continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed, lights changed, people lived. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I felt something quieter and far heavier settle into place. Humiliation. Not because I had been lied to, but because I had been reduced to a role in their story. The reliable wife, the convenient solution. They weren't afraid of me. They assumed I would bend. That assumption burned. I saved the footage, backed it up twice, changed my passwords, secured my documents. I moved carefully, quietly, like someone navigating a dark room they finally understood. When I returned to the hospital, I wore the same tired expression. I adjusted Caleb's pillow. I listened to his complaints. I thanked Megan for her help. They noticed something shift. When people believe they're losing control, they tighten their grip. But when they believe they're winning, they relax. I let them believe they were winning. I mentioned casually that I had spoken to a real estate agent. I said selling the house might be the only way to survive if his recovery took longer. I spoke slowly, as if the words hurt to say. The effect was immediate. Caleb softened. He held my hand longer. He talked about gratitude and fear, about not wanting to be a burden. Megan's relief was poorly hidden. Soon after, the pressure from his family began. Conversations about sacrifice, about how money meant nothing compared to life. I nodded. I listened. I didn't argue. Behind the scenes, I met with a lawyer. I gathered financial records, traced debt patterns, followed transfers, gambling losses, unofficial lenders. Everything Caleb had buried under silence surfaced neatly on paper. Megan grew careless. She whispered too confidently. She grew impatient when I delayed decisions. Caleb slipped too. Some days he forgot to moan. Some days he sat up too straight. I noticed everything. Still, I said nothing. Timing matters. And the longer they believed the ending was guaranteed, the more completely they revealed themselves. The collapse came quietly. Visiting hours were almost over. Caleb's mother sat beside the bed whispering prayers. Megan stood near the window, checking her phone too often. Caleb kept asking about paperwork, about calls, about the house. I answered gently every time. Then the door opened. 3 men walked in without hesitation. They didn't look like family. Their posture was rigid, their eyes sharp. The air in the room changed instantly. One of them spoke Caleb's name. Color drained from his face. He began moaning loudly, gripping the sheets, performing perfectly. His mother stood up, demanding answers. The man smiled thinly and said they were here about money. The room fell silent. They named the amount owed, the interest, the deadline. They said they were done waiting. Caleb turned to me, desperation spilling into his voice. He told them I was selling the house. He told them the money was coming. That was when I stepped forward. I said there would be money, but not from my house. Every face turned toward me. I connected my phone to the screen on the wall, and I pressed play. The footage filled the room. Caleb laughing, eating, drinking, Megan beside him, their voices explaining everything they believed would never be heard. His mother screamed. Megan slid down the wall, her hands shaking. Caleb tried to speak, but no sound came out. The men watched without interrupting. When the video ended, one of them laughed softly. He said he had never seen someone fake a tragedy so thoroughly. They left with a warning for Caleb. When the door closed, the room felt hollow. The performance was over, and everyone had finally seen the truth. Caleb reached for me, begging, promising explanations, change, anything. I looked at him and felt nothing at all. I told him I would not sell the house. I would not take responsibility for his debts. I told him I would be filing for divorce. This wasn't punishment. It was consequence. And consequences don't need cruelty to be effective. I gathered my bag slowly. This time my hands didn't shake. And I walked out of the hospital without looking back. The air outside the hospital felt sharper than I remembered. Cold, clean, real. The automatic doors slid shut behind me, sealing in the beeping machines, the lies, the performance that had finally run its course. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, my bag heavy on my shoulder, my chest strangely light. For weeks, my life had revolved around that room, around pretending, waiting, enduring. Now, there was nothing left to wait for. The divorce papers were filed within days. With the evidence I had gathered, there was no room for negotiation or manipulation. Caleb's debts were traced clearly: gambling losses, private loans, financial obligations that existed long before the accident. They were his alone. The brownstone my parents left me remained untouched, legally and morally mine, exactly as they had intended. Caleb's world, however, unraveled quickly. Without an audience, the performance collapsed. His health deteriorated once the lies no longer served him. Investigations followed. Excuses stopped working. Sympathy dried up. I did not watch from a distance or ask for updates. I did not need to. Megan vanished from my life entirely. No apologies, no explanations, just absence. I didn't chase it. Some silences are answers. For a while, I lived quietly. I returned to work and let numbers ground me again. I focused on audits, timelines, patterns that made sense. In the evenings, I cooked simple meals and sat in rooms that felt honest. There was loneliness, yes, but it was clean loneliness, not the kind that eats at your dignity. Peace, I learned, is not loud. It was during this time that I met Daniel Brooks. He was introduced through work. Calm, observant, thoughtful in a way that didn't demand attention. He listened more than he spoke. He never asked questions that pried. When he noticed my boundaries, he respected them without comment. We talked about ordinary things, projects, cities, small frustrations. There was no urgency to define anything, no pressure to explain my past. That difference mattered more than I expected. For years, I had lived in a constant state of emotional defense. With Daniel, I didn't feel the need to perform or justify myself. I was simply allowed to exist. Slowly, carefully, something began to rebuild. Not dramatically, not all at once. Daniel never positioned himself as a rescue. There were no promises to fix what had been broken. He never spoke badly about my past or rushed me toward a future I wasn't ready to name. We spent time together in small, ordinary ways. Coffee after work, quiet walks, conversations that ended naturally instead of being forced forward. One evening, sitting across from each other at a small table, Daniel said something that stayed with me. He said he believed trust was not something you demand. It's something you earn slowly, through consistency. The words settled deep. I realized then how thoroughly I had misunderstood love before. I had mistaken intensity for commitment, endurance for loyalty. I had believed suffering quietly was proof of devotion. But love, real love, does not require disappearance. With Daniel, there was no suffering to justify, no role to play. I wasn't careful because I was afraid. I was careful because I valued myself. We didn't rush into labels. We didn't promise futures. What we built was slower and steadier than anything I had known, and in that slowness, I felt something unfamiliar and precious. Safety. Not the fragile safety built on silence and sacrifice, but the kind that lets you breathe without watching every word or step. Looking back now, I understand something I couldn't see then. This story was never about revenge. It was about clarity. For a long time, I believed love meant endurance, that loyalty meant silence, that if I just waited longer and gave more, everything would eventually make sense. But when respect disappears, patience doesn't save a relationship. It only delays the damage. Caleb didn't lose me because of one mistake. He lost me because he chose deception over honesty, convenience over character. And I didn't walk away to punish him. I walked away because staying would have meant abandoning myself. If you're listening to this and recognizing pieces of your own life in mine, hear this clearly. You are not weak for trusting. You are not cruel for choosing yourself. And walking away from a toxic situation is not failure. It is responsibility. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop explaining, stop sacrificing, and start protecting what matters most. Your dignity, your peace, your future. Because the moment you stop playing a role in someone else's deception is the moment you finally return to your own life. And that, quietly, firmly, is where everything truly begins.